Hello and welcome to the Council for a Livable World post-election conference call with our Executive Director, John Tierney, former Congressman. Please note this call is being recorded. John will briefly discuss the election results, our endorsed candidates' performance in Senate and House races, and our next steps. We will wrap up with a question and answer session. Until the Q&A session, all participant lines will be muted. I would like to hand it over back to John now. Thank you.
Thanks, Hazel. We got a little bit of that done already since before we had a little technical difficulty, but it's nice to know that we're through that. And this is, of course, a call that we hope to replicate over the course of time. We're getting some of the bugs out on today, and I really appreciate the fact that some folks have called in on Eastern Standard Time, even though they're not on Eastern Standard Time, and it's earlier in the day. We're going to try to decide whether or not in the future we can make calls at different times of the day to perhaps make it at 6 or so for those on the West Coast and the central part of the country as well. As I started to say, we got thumped. People are concerned, as you might think that they are going to be, and the problem is that we can't wait around for 2 or 4 or 6 years to try to react to what happened. We need to have a short-term plan and a long-term plan on this. Start with what might be a little hopeful on that is remembering Tip O'Neill's comments when Bill Clinton won and had a House and Senate in the Democratic Party with him, and Tip O'Neill said, "Be careful what you wish for." He was anticipating the fact that it's difficult as a president, even if you have a party, the same party House and Senate, to get done all the things that you promised to do during the campaign. And I think we all know that it's almost a guarantee that last night's victor, Donald Trump, is not going to be able to do all the things that he's promised, and that there will be some disappointed and perhaps some discontented people in a couple of years. So the outside window on this, obviously, is we want to focus on 2018 to try and make sure that we keep all of the people that we think are progressive national policy people in office and look for some additional seats there. And in the meantime, having served in Congress for 18 years, 14 of which I was in the minority, I can tell you that we don't know that you're going to get many opportunities to get things done on a positive agenda, but we certainly have a responsibility to try to stop bad things and even worse things from happening. The best example I recall on that was when George Bush decided he was going to privatize Social Security. He thought he had an electoral mandate to do that, and we were able to organize with groups, outside groups, as well as members of Congress, and had over 1,000 hearings across the country, motivating people, informing them, informing the media, where the temperature got up so high that George Bush eventually withdrew his proposal on that. We're going to find ourselves in a similar position, whether it's President Trump's attempt to withdraw from the Iran agreement, whether it's his attempt to do all of the modernization, so-called modernization of the nuclear arsenal at one time at tremendous cost at the expense of conventional weapons or other expenses that need to be met. You go down the line to a laundry list of things that we're going to have to be active on, and we're going to have to find a way to start, hopefully, of meeting the people that are going to be in his administration and trying to have some impact there, understanding that that might be more than a little bit difficult, working in Congress with people that will listen, no matter what party they're from, and particularly knowing that in the Senate there's an ability to stop very bad things from happening if they use their rules appropriately or whatever, and try to make sure that we have staff and members there informed well enough and give them all the backup they need on information, and then be able to move out into our members writ large and our partners' members writ large across the country to mobilize people and mobilize the media on a large scale or whatever to turn the temperature up against bad things as high as we can. So we've got a lot of work that has to be done now. We don't really have time to linger on the bad fortune of tonight, but we also know that the presidential victor last night is a bit of an enigma, and we don't know exactly what his policies are or what he's going to be doing, or if he's going to change his mind, or if he was just lying, or whether he was telling the truth of his intent to go forward. So we're going to have some reaction right on the spot. But we intend to be active and engaged. We intend to come back to all of you for your help on a regular basis. And this call this evening is just one way of trying to start out a conversation. I do want to share with you that your help, raised over $1.3 million for the candidates that we endorsed. And even though not all of our candidates that we endorsed won, obviously, I think those that did win probably would not have all had the fortune that they had without your support and your work and assistance on that. In the Senate, we returned Schatz and Murray to the Senate. They both had strong races on that. We had a pickup with Tammy Duckworth, whom I served with in the House, going to be a good new senator. Cortez Masto retained Harry Reid's seat, and Governor Hassan was declared just a little later in the day today as the victor in New Hampshire. So we've got people that are new members in the Senate that we'll be working with on a basis on that. We have House members. Murphy from Florida beat John Mica, and if any of you know John Mica, his absence is going to be a plus on that. And having met candidate Murphy, she's going to be a plus for us. Demings in Florida, Kristen Florida won, Foster in Illinois, Rick Nolan, a friend of mine from Minnesota, in a tough district up there that went with Trump. He managed to pull it off in a very, very razor-thin election. Kuhn in Nevada, Shea Porter, who's won, lost, and now has won again with your help, won in New Hampshire. You all raised more than $30,000 for her, which will be a significant reminder to her that she has friends. Annie Custer won in New Hampshire as well. McKeechin in Virginia. So there were a number of victories, all of which are people that have a like-minded philosophy when it comes to national security and peace, as we all do, and a base of new people to deal with. And as you know from our historical efforts, we have a number of bases already in the Senate and the House to work with as well. So with that report, I'm going to stop and ask Hazel I guess what Hazel would like me to do is take the first email question, and then as you've all had a chance to queue up, we'll then alternate. She'll give me one of the questions that's been called or emailed in recently, and then we'll go back. The first question that was emailed in was from Tony Perriano, who wanted to know is where does a lifelong Democrat or progressive go after yesterday, which might be the first reaction that a lot of us had. And look, as I said, what we don't do is we don't retreat and we don't go away and we don't sit around and just lick our wounds. We have to get a plan. We have to have a strategy. So we have a short-term strategy and a long-term strategy. The short-term strategy is to mobilize, is to inform, is to make sure that we get all the education out on these issues to the media, to the public, and to members of Congress and their staffs, and the new Trump administration people, and that we try to impress them with that and mobilize those people who believe strongly in it as we do, and mobilize locally as well as nationally. Because every dollar we spend on national defense, every dollar we spend on the nuclear system, on that doesn't have to be spent, is taking away and robbing money from a lot of other needs that we have. I'll talk a little bit more later on about some climate change and environmental issues, but we've got to learn to find ways to connect with people very active in that movement, as well as the social justice movement and others, so that we expand our base and get more allies on. We've got to show an interest in their issues. We've got to find a way that they intersect, and we've got to get them interested in our issues to do that out. So we've got a lot of work to do, and we're open for business for people who want to give us ideas on how to do some of these things on that, and we look forward to counting on you for your support so we're able to do those. And with that, Hazel, if you have somebody or you want to let somebody on the line to ask their question.
Thank you, John. In order to ask a question, please press *6. For now, we will take another question we received through email while questions come in on the phone. Our question through email was from Kitty on the Iran deal. Specifically, what will happen on the Iran deal? Well,
it's anybody's guess of what might happen to the Iran deal. Obviously, candidate Trump indicated that he was going to tear it up on that. I don't think it's going to be that easy for him. And while I can't put it past the fact that he may try to renege on that agreement or back off of it, there are tremendous consequences for doing that. And I think he's going to find that out between now and the time he gets sworn in, and certainly after he gets sworn in. That was just not an agreement or political understanding between the United States and Iran. There were other countries involved on that. And if he thinks he's going to renege or withdraw from that, and the other countries are still going to be willing to stand with the United States and to reimpose sanctions, I think he's going to find out they're not. That they're going to turn on the United States for being the one that unilaterally breaks an agreement on that or an understanding on that, and that is going to create complications on him. Also, if he were to try and renege on that, he's given a license to Iran to just go back into the business of either underground or overtly trying to put together a nuclear system. Again, while they may pay some consequences in international opinion about their ability to do that, I don't think, as I said before, you're going to be able to mobilize the rest of the international community against them. The question will be whether or not They no longer allow the IAEA in to inspect and claim that they're not doing anything while they're doing things secretly, or just how much they might proceed on that. I'm sure they'll try to get both the benefits of the bargain they already have with contracts like Boeing's and others that are in there for business. They'll try to get access to those types of arrangements on that, but they would be much harder to track as they then try to move forward to both a missile system and a nuclear system on that basis. But while I don't put it past Mr. Trump totally from doing something like saying he's reneging or not, I'm thinking it's going to be more difficult for him, that he's probably going to end up somewhere claiming that he's going to try to renegotiate or re-engage or something on that basis. That would be the more practical solution on that. But certainly, we're all waiting to see, but we should be ready, and we should be ready to mobilize everybody as to our national opinion that this is not the way to go. We don't renege on understandings and agreements, and we don't open ourselves up to a country to then start building a nuclear system that they had agreed not to build. And we certainly don't want to get to the prospect where we end up having a conflict in the Middle East, yet another conflict in that region of the world. And I think there'll be great sentiment nationally to not be in that position. And it'll be our role to work with other people to make sure that people understand that's a consequence and mobilize against it. So, Hazel, do you have anybody in queue?
I do. So I'm going to unmute the line.
And that person will know they've been unmuted?
Have you picked up any hints whether the Republican Senate leadership will keep the current rules on cloture, or will they try to expedite proceedings and essentially go nuclear?
Yeah, I don't have any indications at all, nor do any of my former colleagues I talked to, and told folks in the Senate, friends in the Senate, that they're going to try to go nuclear. There's the situation in the Senate that people are always concerned that they're going to be the next ones to be in the minority, and they don't want to walk away from what they think is a safeguard to do that. I think that if Chuck Schumer and Democrats use the process to their advantage on a number of occasions, too many occasions, whatever, there'll be threats of going nuclear, and it may build to that case eventually on that. But at least in the short term, I don't see them doing that. And I think that we'll see what happens generally is the Democrats are not as intent on stopping a Republican president from doing anything at all. They've generally had a history of trying to work when they can work. I remember when George Bush was in his education initiatives and others, Democrats tried to work with them and didn't just say they were going to stonewall everything, as McConnell said about President Obama. So with that in mind, I suspect there'll be some effort to get some things done on that, and that Schumer and others may at some point decide to put their foot down. It depends on how often they do it and how serious the Republicans and Mr. Trump are on a particular issue as to whether they start huffing and puffing about going nuclear on that. But even then, as we found out in the last session when the shoe was on the other foot, people are very reluctant to do that because someday they perceive themselves to be in the minority, and they're going to want that opportunity. So, Hazel, are we taking another question, or are we going back to email?
Yes. We're taking another question that's come in on the phone.
Good.
This is Laurie Dewey. And,
hi, Laurie. How are you?
Oh, I'm holding up. It's good to hear your voice.
Thank you.
Oh, my goodness. Trump has assembled a scary cabinet and a White House team like Jeff Sessions and Rudy Giuliani, Chris Christie, and Newt Gingrich. How are we going to be able to counteract the advice that he's being given by these people in his cabinet?
Well, yeah, I must have read this. I must have read the same article you read, Laurie, because I was looking through that cast of frightful characters, and his first opportunity is that the Senate will have a chance to try to block those that they think are just so out of the line that they can't tolerate it. And I don't mean everybody, because certainly they'll try to. For instance, I don't think they would try to block a Bob Corker, who is Secretary of State, but they may well go against a John Bolton. It's all a matter of degree on that. But that's, one aspect on that. It reminds me of the Reagan years when Reagan got in and the cast of characters he started putting into his cabinet positions on that. So, we're going to, again, it's all a question of mobilizing and trying to turn the temperature up and stopping bad things from happening. But it's the Senate, which is the bulwark against the really, really bad ones. And after that, it's the public and the media and all of us and activist groups or whatever that have to go to work to temper whatever bad things they're going to do and try to bring policy around.
Can I ask another quickie?
Sure.
Thank you. Are we working in tandem with the Union of Concerned Scientists? Because one wonders what will become of the Paris Agreement on the climate.
Yeah, we work very well with the Union of Concerned Scientists on a regular basis, and you may remember, Laurie, I've worked with them back into the 1990s when I would have them in as witnesses, expert witnesses in a lot of our cases on the proliferation issues and the development of investment systems that didn't work and were wasteful and destabilizing. And we continue to have a good relationship with them as an organization, and as do I personally. So then, but also the Physicians for Social Responsibility and others who got very active in those types of agreements. And hopefully, and I had a meeting today with one of the groups I want to work with on that, we're going to be able to form some partnerships with our groups. And one of the things I've noticed since I came on board here in this not-for-profit world is I don't think we work often enough in partnerships and have the mechanism to get the funders to agree to have that happen to be supportive of it. But we can really multiply our numbers and our impact if we can find a way to target everybody to what they do best and work in a cooperative effort on that. And they certainly have the expertise. And when I talk a little later about climate and things of that nature, they've done a lot of the research. You'll remember that Carl Sagan, who was on our board for years, was the first to recognize the impact of nuclear explosions on a nuclear winter that would send this planet back in time and make sure that the people never could grow anything for at least 10 years if it happened. The Physicians for Social Responsibility, the Union of Concerned Scientists, and others have done great research on saying it doesn't take a war between Russia and the United States for something like that to happen. It could begin to happen if India and Pakistan were to go at each other with nuclear weapons. You know, it may be that it just is regional or continental if it happens on that basis, but there's some evidence that it would expand beyond there and impact the entire world, the entire planet on that. And so, you know, we're going to work very, very closely with them, and that may be one way that we get into enlarging our army of people that are involved in this, if we can get those that are focused on the climate change to understand this is one issue within that realm.
Excellent. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Laurie.
Our next question will be, yes. Thank you for that, John. Our next question is one we received through email. Are there unilateral steps such as declaring no first-use policy and taking weapons off alert that President Obama can take and that President Trump would have a very difficult time reversing?
Yeah, but that's a question. I also remember there was another question that went along that line that I think I took a look at on the thing before that asked whether or not we could deny Donald Trump access to the nuclear codes. So it all goes hand in glove on this. The thing is, no, there's no action that President Obama could take as an executive order that couldn't be reversed by a new president. That's not to say it would be easy to do and that there wouldn't be some repercussions to do that politically and internationally. President Obama could, for instance, take a policy on de-alerting our ICBMs, the land-based missiles, so that we had the ability to have a little more thought time than 30 minutes or less to make a decision on whether or not to react to a warning, knowing that we still had our bombers and our submarines to respond and be a deterrent if we did that. But it doesn't mean that Donald Trump couldn't come in and say, well, I'd change that whole policy. We're going back and putting everything on alert. Same goes too with unprovoked first use. President Obama came out and said we will not use nuclear weapons first if not provoked. President Trump could come back and just reverse that policy as well on that. So that's a problem there. Right now, the system is that the president is the one that decides whether or not to use the nuclear code and send missiles off. He can unilaterally change that. He could set up a structure where somebody in the military or somebody else that he appointed would have that authority. That's highly unlikely. Congress could pass legislation. That would take a considerable amount of time to do it. I'm not sure if this Congress, the way it's constituted, would actually do it, but they could pass legislation mandating that somebody else make that decision as opposed to the president, or that a process be set up. But I don't know that this Congress is going to pass any such law on that basis. And if they did pass legislation on a process change on that, they'd probably have to do something about de-alerting in the meantime and let that process actually work its way. So not a lot of hope there. It looks like hopefully we're going to educate this president-to-be and his people to understand that you can't just be making quick reactions on that. I think part of that is showing them the consequences. People like William Perry, Senator Lugar, Senator Nunn, people of that caliber who can get to this administration will be listened to with great respect, who can then impactfully tell them that this is the consequence, this is what happens when these things go off, and this is the result of that. You just don't do it because you're mad at somebody or whatever, and you don't believe that you can even start a tactical aspect on that. There's a lot of talk now about Russia wanting to have tactical nuclear weapons. We got rid of ours years ago because it just didn't make sense to us, because there's no way of stopping the escalation once it starts. Some people say, well, we're going to not have intercontinental ballistic missiles or long-range missiles. We're going to have, in India and Pakistan, we're talking about this, we're going to have missiles that short distance, that don't go through the atmosphere, and they're just going to be targeted on the other forces of the people that we're fighting with. But nobody has come up with an explanation of how does that stop from escalating. You do that, somebody's going to have tit for tat, and then somebody's going to think, well, it's going to escalate, so I'm going to take the first move, and you're off and running. Tremendously destabilizing, and hopefully these wiser heads who do command respect by both Republicans and Democrats will get to this White House. I know they're already working on trying to find out who in the Trump administration would be responsive to that, and we'll be helping them also to get in there and have some meetings and start this process.
Thank you. We'll take the next call that we've received through the phone.
This is Bill Schrag. It's been rumored that Michael Flynn is likely to be the next Secretary of Defense. Do we know anything about his attitude towards nuclear weapons deployment or use?
We don't know a lot of that, Phil. I do know that if he were going to be the next Secretary of Defense, he was formerly the Director of Defense Intelligence Agency, for those that may not know all the detail on that. But he has to get a waiver to actually get in that position because he hasn't been out for 7 years on that. And generally you can't go from the military into the administration without a 7-year period of time passing unless you get a waiver from Congress. Whether he would get that or not, I don't know. That's certainly something that the Democrats in the Senate might use as a reason to step up and stop that. But I don't know. He's obviously very kinetic. He was a Defense Intelligence Agency when he would come before the committee when I was on it. He was not somebody that was a shrinking violet by any sort of a way. He's aggressive, and as I say, kinetic on that. He has never, to my knowledge, made any overt statements about unilateral use of nuclear weapons or any excessive use of those. I know people that think he's somewhat of a moderating force in that regard on the Trump administration, that he's, as much as a hard bar as he is, he at one point in time was willing to advise Hillary Clinton if she'd asked him. And she didn't, and then he went over where he was being asked and weighed in there. But most people that I know that work with him, other people that were in the military with him, think that he certainly is a hawk, and he's certainly aggressive. They don't think that he's the type of person that would be jumping out to use nuclear weapons unprovoked or to do something rash and crazy with it, whatever. But we have to learn more about him to know that, and to figure that if he doesn't get it, we have to deal with Jeff Sessions, who I would be probably a little more concerned about, the senator from Alabama, who I always thought was less, well, I should say more unstable on that basis. Stephen Hadley is another suggestion that they're talking about, the former National Security Advisor. I think we already know from his service in that position that he's not likely to go out and do anything rash on that. And former Senator Jim Talent from Missouri has been mentioned on that. I served with Jim. I don't read him as being somebody that would do anything other than probably bring some stability to that situation.
Thank you. Our next question will be one we've received through email. Can Democrats win back the Senate in 2018?
Well, it is going to be tough. The problem is that in 2018, we have 33 seats that are up for grabs, and only one of them is a Republican seat, and 2 of them are independent, and all the rest are Democrats. So we're going to have an effort there to just hold the fort on that. Again, when I say this is where Tip O'Neill's comment comes in, be careful what you wish for. By then, presumably they will not have been able to produce a lot of what they promised to do. I don't think everybody in the Midwest is going to find themselves in a manufacturing job between now and then, because the trade is not the only issue on that, and there's a lot involved on that, and some of the other promises made. But that's going to be an effort is to stop the community being bleeding and take a shot. We have to analyze between now and then where are the spots where incumbents are firm and shore them up, and then be able to just focus all your resources there. It's a situation where every couple of years you get 1/3 of the Senate up, and this is a bad turn of the Senate. We had our shot this time. We weren't able to pick up the 5 or whatever. So I think realistically and honestly, we're going to be more in a posture of making sure that we don't backtrack and lose space on the next one. What we can do is get more seats in the House. And that historically has been an opportunity in the first election after a president is elected on that. There's history both ways, but more history, I think, in the idea that you pick up a number of seats in the off presidential election year, and we're going to focus on that. So an opportunity to pick up some and make it less easy for them to be running roughshod with policy through the House, so that you don't have just the backup of the Senate's ability to filibuster. You have a strong presence in the House that makes it difficult for the House majority to just run rampant.
Thank you. Our next question will be one through the phone.
Hi there, John. Phil Coyle. My question was about 2018, but you've already answered it.
All right. Well, good. Then I'm going to take the opportunity to introduce who you are to folks and everything, and then give you a chance. Phil Coyle is on our board and is one of the experts that we rely on over and over again, and I've been relying on him since the late 90s or early 2000 or whatever as an expert witness the work that he did with the testing and evaluation aspects of the administration that he was in, particularly around national missile defense. And it is an area where, Phil, if you could just give us a couple-minute riff on how much money we put into that and how there's no assurance that it's ever going to work, and certainly has not been tested to work now at a level that would have us think that we could rely on it, and what impact on destabilization it has with respect to what China reacts and Russia react to when it gets deployed overseas, even though it doesn't work at the present time, but they think it does.
Well, yes, we are spending and have spent billions and billions of dollars on missile defense. And especially the system that's deployed in Alaska, the ground-based mid-course missile defense system, has been very expensive and has worked poorly in flight intercept tests. One of the developments that I'll be looking to watch is if the Trump administration pushes to open up a new missile defense site on the East Coast, a so-called third site after the one that's in California at Vandenberg and the one in Alaska, which would be a terrible waste of money, more billions, but controlling both houses, the Trump administration may now try to go for the money to buy a third site.
Well, thanks, Phil. And that is one thing that we would have to mobilize for, but we have the research and we have the science on our side on that, but the billions of dollars that have been spent so far could have been put to such greater use, even if it were to deal with some of the issues that people sometimes raise about readiness in the military, although General Petraeus and others say that we're as ready as we've been in quite some time. Certainly, if you weren't spending money on a weapons system that didn't work before you had it tested and proved that it could, you weren't deploying it until that time, then that would be money you could put to other conventional purposes or into other uses that we need in science or health or education as well. So thank you, Phil. That was great.
Thank you. Our next question is, what do you think are the implications for U.S.-Russia relations?
Well, they could be interesting. The implications for U.S.-Russia relations, if we take Donald Trump's expressions during the campaign or whatever, he thinks that we're not dealing with them enough. And Hillary Clinton, on the other hand, was a bit of a hard bar on that. She was really adamant that Russia needed to be pushed back somewhat on that, and that she wouldn't be very anxious to deal with Putin or Russia. I think a lot of people in the peace and security field, were somewhere to the right of Donald Trump and to the left of Hillary Clinton on that, where certainly can't embrace Putin or Putin's Russia given their behavior and their conduct and attitude or whatever. But on the other hand, you cannot just turn down and say we're not going to have any discussions about proliferation or some of the other issues that are critical to the world and to us, just as we did in the 80s. When the public in Russia and the public in the United States took to the streets and took to rallies and got on top of this issue and said to their governments, look, you have to deal with this issue of proliferation and nuclear weapons, despite the fact that you're angry with each other about everything else under the sun, it brought it to bear. And if Donald Trump can be convinced that he has to have some level of discussions on proliferation and nuclear weapons and a reduction of those and doing something about nuclear-grade weapons materials that are out there and securing them and making that safe like that, then that will be a plus. And if he's open to that, that may be somewhere that we can actually get something positive done, so long as he's not so enamored with that Putin he wants to give up the store and a lot of other aspects. Whatever, if we can focus him on nuclear non-proliferation and securing nuclear-grade weapons materials, then through whether it's back channels or even direct negotiations, and that without forgetting the bad things that Putin and Putin's Russia are involved in, and making sure that we don't give up our leverage to deal with those in a more concrete fashion or whatever, there may be a plus in there somewhere. So there seems to be some maneuvering room on that, and we could be supportive if he does it in the right way at the right time on that. We'll wait and see whether he follows through on his campaign words and rhetoric, or whether that was all just an expression when he gets in. The other side is going to take over, that somehow Putin is going to do something that crosses him or challenges his view of things or whatever, and he decides to lash back, in which case that could be a serious issue too if he overreacts.
Thank you. Our next question will be through the phone.
Hi, this is Edward Levine. I wonder if when President Trump pushes his tax cut proposal, he will find that he's running out of money for things like nuclear weapons, and whether we can work well with particularly House appropriators, even though they're Republican.
Well, that is an interesting question. The more interesting question is whether he would care if he's building up an even larger deficit, because when you look at his tax program, it blow a hole in a deficit situation, and he didn't seem to care while he was on the campaign stump. But there are some people in the Republican caucus, both in the Senate and the House, that are real budget hawks, even more than they are security hawks on that. And so there's room, and we've started to deal with them in the past. We've worked cooperatively with this entire piece of security. We house in here a program, the Pentagon budget campaign, that focuses on how much money is dumped into the Pentagon at different times, and how we could better use that money and how we could push back. And there's been an effort to engage people that are independents and people that are Republican and get them on. There's been some Republican groups, whether it's the Heritage Foundation or Cato or the Taxpayers for Justice and groups like that have cooperated and worked on that and identified people in the Republican Party that are concerned about these issues. So we certainly would be putting the full court press on that type of an effort to make sure that if that's the point where we can get people to talk, and it's the budget issues and costs, and that the side effect of having them have a more reasonable nuclear policy or Pentagon budget policy, then certainly we'll be pushing those buttons very hard as well.
Thank you. Our next question is, how do you see climate change affecting global security in the next 4 years? And are there any fruitful opportunities to join forces with the climate movement?
Well, I think I talked a little bit about the latter part of that question. There are opportunities to join forces with the climate movement on that, and we've got to reach out to them, and hopefully they'll reach out to us to find some intersecting interest on that. But the other part of that is the leaders in our military have made it very clear, the chiefs and others, that they believe that climate change is real, and they believe the impact it's going to have on other nations is going to cause national security problems. Now, whether they have to go to President Trump and say, look, don't believe it's climate change, we don't want to, but there are things changing in the world that mean there's going to be more flooding, that mean there's going to be more severe storms, that means there's going to be more droughts. All of these things are happening, and to the extent that they happen and cause people to emigrate to other places, or there to be unrest or a shortage of needs, then they could be destabilizing, and they could result in conflicts in any of these places on that basis. So in that sense, they're a national security risk to us. as well as to their own countries and their neighbors on that. So we should get out in front of this. We should have a policy that tries to make sure that we deal with any environmental issue that will be able to stop these things from happening, whatever you think the cause is. We have to do it. And if the cause happens to be, emissions and things of that nature, then they've got to try to impress on the president that this is what he's going to have to deal with. That's going to be an educational process. He's going to find resistance in his own party, but it's going to take several years to move him to that point, and we'll see whether or not it can be done. But in the meantime, we can be putting a lot of education with, hopefully, our partners out there in the climate change to increase knowledge out in the local areas, whether it's on campuses, whether it's among groups like physicians or others out there, housewives, men and women who work, any of those groups like that, to get them to start mobilize to say to their elected representatives, look, you've got to do something about this. This is a national security threat as well as like an environmental threat on that, and put it in that perspective for them. I think you would find some movement in the military, in the Pentagon, especially the upper echelons, who would get on board. We spend a tremendous amount of money every year in the Department of Defense on research into alternative fuels. And they understand, the fact that we can't always stay with extractive energy of oil and gas and coal, which we have for all of our facilities around the world, but also which powers all of our mobile weapons, whether it's a tank or a truck or personnel carrier, any of those things. The amount of gasoline that we go through in any enterprise and the risk taken in the long lines of logistics, the most dangerous situation in any military enterprise is the logistical change. Trying to get things to the front, people that are out the tip of the spear, and working that whole line is exposed. Most times is delivering oil or some extractive point on that. If you can find another way to energize or power the things that you need, and certainly they've been working hard on that, and they're doing that because they believe in climate change. They believe that using these things is expensive and dangerous, and it hurts the environment, creates all the situations we talked about that destabilize different people. So it's an education process. It's something that we're going to have to spend a lot of time encouraging those people in the military to bring to the White House and to Congress, and then to get people back in their local districts and everything like that to keep raising the specter and raise the education on that.
Thank you. At this point, we're showing no questions in the queue. To ask a question, dial *6. We'll take one last question we've received through email.
Okay.
My question is, do you think Democrats and others would be better off and more successful if we change the way we think and feel about being right and people being evil? For example, what if we admitted that we could be mistaken about things we hold dear and assume that there are no evil people in the world, only people who do evil things mistakenly, and so they need not to be punished but educated?
Oh, this is a deep question to wrap things up with. Thoughtful. Look, I think that we obviously all are not listening to one another. I don't think it's just Democrats, but I don't think Republicans or Democrats are listening to each other. But from a Democratic perspective, we certainly could have done better of listening to people that disagree with us and not being as adamant in dismissing them. I think that's a reflection in good part of what happened last night. People responding to that who didn't think they were being listened to, who thought they were being dissed, and reacting to that. I think that there are areas of agreement, that we knew about, and we should have listened harder. We should have addressed them, knowing about them, whether or not we listened. We knew that people were mad and should have been mad that a lot of banks weren't held accountable and bankers weren't held accountable when we were dealing with the crisis of the 2007, 2008, and beyond on that. And in we could have addressed that to a degree, because something has to be done on holding those people accountable. Economic inequality. There could have been a lot more of that talked about. There was during the primary. It sort of got lost in personalities and things back and forth in the general. We could have been talking about homeowners and how if the banks were bailed out, why weren't homeowners bailed out? That was a serious issue that we should have talked about. I know we fought when I was in office. We fought with the administration about that they should have done more. And when we passed the law, we held it up for a week. We had to put in clauses empowering President Bush's secretaries to actually do something about it. It was carried over into the Obama administration and fought both of them, but they certainly should have done more about people whose homeowner rights were imperiled. So there are a lot of issues where we should have listened harder, and we should have addressed in the campaign with some passion. We should have addressed them. And I think that would have made a difference on that. There are some areas, however, I think where I think we'd probably end up agreeing to disagree. Questions if we could do that with enough civility to at least get people to look beyond it. And that would be on issues of choice, on equal rights and human rights, things like that, where people are probably not going to move off their position, but can they at least understand that somebody has an opinion that has to be listened to? And again, so we have. But there's one thing that Democrats do get right time and again. They just honor the results of an election. They are Democrats with a small d. They believe in the process, and they believe on recognizing that when it's one that there has to be a peaceful change of hands. It's not something that President Trump to be or his people were saying they were going to do. They were trying to discredit the system. They were going to rise up against it or whatever. Now that they have the result that they have and Democrats are accepting it, however reluctantly and sadly, I wonder if they won't listen back more themselves and open themselves up to listening to Democrats' perspective and take the leadership where they thought we didn't and move forward on that. But certainly in that regard, we can all do better.
Thank you. We have one more question in the queue.
Sure. Let's take that before we wrap.
Yeah. Hey, John, this is Jules Acker. How are you?
Good, Jules. How are you?
Good, thank you. I don't know if you remember that Reagan, as hawkish as he was, basically both at Reykjavik and before that, really was thinking about nuclear abolition, getting rid of all nuclear weapons. Mm-hmm. And the question that I had, given the somewhat megalomaniacal personality of someone like Trump, something along the lines of nuclear zero or getting rid of all nuclear weapons, similar to what Reagan was trying to do, might have some appeal. I just wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Well, look, first of all, I'm way too young to remember the Reagan years, but I know you won't buy that. So, we remember that, and you're right. I mean, it was a surprise position for Reagan to take on that. They came through education. It came that once he got elected, people started explaining to him the risks involved in nuclear weapons, the consequences, and showed him the reality of it. Then he decided he was going to do something about it. There are parts of the Donald Trump that I've witnessed. I don't pretend at all to know him, but the parts that you witness are that at some point he may say, well, hell, I'm just going to go do this. I think that Putin and I should be talking about this, and maybe if we can get the two of us to do something later on, we can expand it out and get China and other countries involved in it. Would be a huge thing for him to do. There's that side of the personality, and I think that we shouldn't fail to take a chance at seeing if we can activate that part of his personality and his psyche and move on that. Certainly worth the effort, and it may take some time, but we have all the right people, I think, in former administrations who have dealt with this issue currently. Somebody like General Cartwright, who was the head of the command. Well, he's now adamantly active with Global Zero. And knows full well that even though he used to be the head of Strategic Command, he understands that there's no other solution to getting rid of these things. The sooner the better. Bill Perry would agree to that. Schultz agrees with it. Henry Kissinger agrees with it. And these are all people that can be introduced to this new president, and he may be impressed enough to listen and decide it's an opportunity for him to do something really big, in which case we should set aside everything else and get behind that effort. So let me thank you, Jules, for that last question, but thank everybody who called in tonight. I know that you've all got great ideas and other questions. If you still have a question, and I don't think anybody else is in the queue, we took care of that. But if you have any ideas, send them in. We certainly don't have a monopoly on those by any stretch of the imagination. Ways that the Council for the Living World can lead in the effort to advocate for our goals and missions and to eliminate nuclear weapons, to secure nuclear-grade materials, ways to get there over time, ways to get there faster rather than later. We're open. We're open to that and to work on that. And other groups, whether they be environmental groups, global climate change groups, that you think we can be partnering with, that may be open into a partnership and ideas of how that partnership would work, please share those with us as well. So thank you all. Not a good week for a lot of us, whatever, but we're in a position to try to make something out of that and do what we can do so things don't get worse. And if we can, make them better, make the world more livable. So thank you all very, very much.